The Detroit Pistons pick that went number 2, it was originally a Grizzlies pick that had a number 1 protection on it.
Oh.
Yeah, and the 2004 Grizzlies with Pau Gasol, Jason Williams, Mike Miller, and Shane Battier won 50 games.
Damn.
And you want to know who was the executive of the Grizzlies at that time?
Yeah, I know. It's Jerry West. I did a video.
Yeah, Jerry West. So LeBron James was almost drafted to a 50-win team, a young 50-win team, with an executive that was fucking Jerry West. Before this video starts, if you enjoy this video, there are many more like it on the channel already, with many more to come in the future, so subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100k subscribers by the end of the year, so if you're new here, just click the damn sub button. Also, please drop a like, it really helps the channel out a lot more than you may know. And one more thing, there is a new episode of the Hoopscast out now. Me and Mojo, as well as a guest, did some NBA Would You Rathers, as well as talked about what we've been doing in life without the NBA. Spoiler alert, it's depressing. So go check that out. The new episode should be on Spotify, and the rest of the older episodes will be on Spotify soon, so go check us out on there as well. But yeah, let's get on to the topic. Today we are talking about the weird circumstances that helped the Celtics draft Larry Bird. Larry Bird is a consensus top 10 player of all time. He scored over 21,000 points, grabbed nearly 9,000 rebounds, and got nearly 5,700 assists. He won 3 championships and won 3 consecutive MVPs. And he did all of this in 12 seasons because he was forced to retire early due to some back issues. When he retired, he did so as arguably the greatest Boston Celtic of all time. The only other guy who it's up for debate with is Bill Russell. When you think of the Boston Celtics, it does not take long for you to think of Larry Bird. There's no doubt that the excellence of the Boston Celtics organization helped propel the legacy of Larry Bird to make him that consensus top 10 player of all time. But what if I told you that Larry made it to Boston based on a loophole that would not have been allowed today? Well, it's true. Bird retired as possibly the greatest Celtic of all time because the league didn't prepare for the scenario that unfolded that allowed Bird to head to Boston. Without this loophole, Bird could have very easily ended up on a different team from the Celtics, changing his legacy, the history of the Boston Celtics, and the history of the NBA as we know it. Larry Bird played his first season in the 1978-1980 season, winning Rookie of the Year in the process. However, he was not a part of the 1979 draft class. He was drafted in 1978. And no, he wasn't drafted and got injured for an entire year. No, he didn't go overseas. I don't even know if that was a thing back then. Bird was selected by the Celtics in 1978, where he then went on to play the 78-79 season for Indiana State in college, where he went on to average 29 points, 15 rebounds, and 5 assists on 53% shooting and lead Indiana to the infamous college championship game, where they would face the Magic Johnson-led Michigan State Trojans, where Bird and Magic famously faced off in college. When they did this, Magic was the consensus #1 prospect going into that draft, and Larry Bird already had a place on an NBA team. The reason Bird ended up playing in college after being drafted was the lack of rules around the NBA draft at the time that were later corrected because of this. Bird had declared for the 1978 draft, where the Celtics would obviously draft Larry. However, rookie contracts at the time were negotiable. Because of this, Bird and his agent took issue with Red Auerbach, who for some reason declared that he would not pay Bird more than any other player on the current Celtics roster. I guess he had something against rookies. It was because of that that Bird decided he would go back to college and re-declare for the 1979 NBA draft, where he would again be a top pick in that draft. However, Auerbach eventually came to the conclusion that he did not want to lose out on Larry Bird, so he basically got punked. as Bird would sign a rookie contract with the Celtics where Bird received $3.25 million over 5 years, which would be the biggest rookie contract ever to that point, and one of the biggest contracts in the league, period. So it's safe to say that Bird came away the winner on that one. He really just punked our back. Now, the reason this was able to happen was because at the time, the NBA and NCAA did not have a rule that made declaring for the draft an all or nothing ordeal. Now, when a prospect declares for the draft, they are required to leave that college, and their fate is determined by whether or not they get drafted. That's the reason that later picks in the first round and later on in the second round tend to be mostly seniors, because for prospects who aren't top of the line, declaring for the draft can be a risk for anyone that isn't a senior, because if you declare as a sophomore and no one drafts you, you can't go back to your college. Your best hope then becomes the G League and Summer League. The NBA, after this happened, made a new rule called the Bird Collegiate rule that meant all prospects who declared for the draft were required to renounce their college eligibility, and later added a rule where rookie contracts were based on where that player was drafted, getting rid of a lot of the negotiation ability. There's still some wiggle room, but for the most part, rookies either get the contract they're offered or they get nothing. Now the question here really is, why does this matter? Well, for one, there was a genuine possibility that Bird does not end up on the Celtics because of this, and they just wasted a draft pick. Both of these rules not being in place contributed to this weird circumstance, but if Bird wanted to, and more importantly, if Red Auerbach didn't come to his senses and gave Bird what he wanted, Bird could have just declared for the 1979 draft and the Celtics would have lost the rights to him. And with Bird statistically improving in his third season in college, he likely would have been the next pick right after Magic Johnson, which belonged to the Chicago Bulls. Had the Bulls decided not to draft him, that would have meant he would have gone to the New York Knicks. But in the event that he goes to Chicago, this of course means the Bulls never draft Michael Jordan, or if he goes to New York, it means the Knicks never draft Patrick Ewing. Because the Bulls with Bird wouldn't have been bad enough to get the third pick in '84 to draft MJ, and the Knicks wouldn't have been bad enough to get Patrick Ewing. Which means, assuming this doesn't cause too much of a ripple effect, Jordan probably ends up in Dallas, Philadelphia, or Washington, which would affect where Charles Barkley goes. He could still end up in Philly, but maybe now it's Dallas or Washington. This might seem like a small thing initially at face value, but when you really dive into the depths of it, this really could have changed everything. Another aspect of this is that Bird essentially became the first draft and stash in NBA history. However, instead of stashing him overseas, which is something the NBA still allows, he was stashed in college. Which obviously meant that Bird was not on the 78-79 Celtics, which matters because that team only won 29 games. They didn't have their pick that year, it actually belonged to the Knicks and ended up going number 3, with that pick being used to draft Bill Cartwright. Boston traded that pick in one of the most underrated horrible trades in NBA history, where they moved that pick for Bob McAdoo, who played 20 games for the Celtics, along with 2 other firsts, 3 first-rounders for 20 games. Quite a trash move, but if they didn't make that move and kept that pick, they could have had a top center of the era because they were able to pull off this loophole. A guy who averaged 18 and 8 on 55% shooting in his prime. Unfortunately, they did trade that pick, but they could have very easily benefited from this. And then finally, there is the very obvious one, which is that we missed out on a year of Larry Bird in the NBA because of this. I know that college basketball fans are glad to have the history of Magic and Bird facing off in the NCAA championship game, but I don't care that much about that. Granted, that interesting chapter of the Bird and Magic rivalry would be cut out, and maybe it weakens their rivalry, but Bird made the 79-80 Celtics instantly better. They went from 29 wins to 61. Assuming he had a very similar impact to what he did in his original rookie year, that throws another team into contention in the 79 playoffs. In 1979, the Seattle Supersonics beat the Washington Bullets in 5 games in the NBA Finals. It's one of the most forgotten and under-talked about championships in NBA history, possibly because it was on a team led by Gus Williams, Dennis Johnson, and Jack Sikma, because, speaking all time here, who really cares about those guys? Really, the only addition that the Celtics made between their 29-win team and their 61-win team was Larry Bird. They still had Cedric Maxwell, Dave Cowens, and Tiny Archibald, so they could have very easily been in the run for the championship in 1979. They could have possibly won that championship or at least had some impact on the result of those playoffs. So Bird ended up in Boston based off a loophole, and if this did not happen, it could have completely reshaped NBA history. Real quick before this video ends, I wanted to quickly mention that I am going to attempt to try and stream on either Saturday or Sunday, probably Sunday. First, I'm going to start with a test stream where I just play a couple games with the LeBron Memphis Grizzlies that I made a whole video about. And then the next stream that we'll do, it's going to be a Portland Trailblazers rebuild. So if you're interested in that, well, now you know. Again, a reminder to check out the latest episode of the Hoopscast. It was a really fun episode, so I highly recommend you give it a watch. But that's the end of this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.